let's just start officially the podcast.
Yep.
I'm super happy, Mr. Nikolaj Knub, but of course I'll say Nikolaj because we're friends, although we actually didn't speak for years and years and years, not because we were like not friends anymore, but we know each other through our shared friend Martijn, who I also interviewed, of course, a while ago. And I thought, I know Nikolaj. He would be amazing for my podcast because, and I'll of course hand you the mic, metaphorically speaking, in a second. But the way I kind of see you, you're this. You are a Jungian depth psychologist. Maybe you use a bit different words. How would you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Hans. I sometimes forget that I'm actually first and foremost a philosopher. I studied philosophy and history at university and fell deeply in love with philosophy before I discovered Jung. So I guess like philosophy is very much my foundation. So sometimes I present myself as a philosopher and Jungian psychotherapist. And now also nature coach. So I took a education in nature coaching that I'll be happy to share a bit about. And then I guess I would also call myself as a meditator, spiritual practitioner, whatever you like. And then a father and a husband. Yeah. Also very importantly. A son and a brother also, yeah. So, that's a very short introduction.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I do want to ask you many questions. But actually, now that you mention it, because I also studied philosophy, and I'm curious, do you have you must have a favorite philosopher, I'm guessing, and who is it, he or she?
Yeah, thanks. I fell in love with Heidegger. So I guess I would say Heidegger, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up writing my thesis about Foucault. So I'm Foucault really, is a fascinating philosopher also. And in my view, very inspired by Heidegger. So there's a connection there between Heidegger and Foucault that I think is not so often recognized, but is quite clear. So Heidegger, and then I would say I also really have a love for Plato. I was actually, my thesis was about Foucault's perspective on ancient philosophy as a way of life, as a practice. So I was very much inspired by ancient philosophy and their way of not only, thinking and, philosophize, but actually practicing. And I think that's quite, there's quite a fascinating perspective on philosophy that is not just theory and thought, but it's practice and embodiment. So this was something that really occupied me in my philosophy studies as well. And I was meditating, and I was quite into Tibetan Buddhism at the time I studied philosophy. I still am. So for me, it was very much a sort of experiential, existential exploration. So all the philosophers who had something to do with experience, and Nietzsche also. Really, I spent a lot of time reading Nietzsche. At the time, a young man, Nietzsche is very sort of, that he can really address the young men, I think, in particular. So, and then I started reading Heidegger, and it was like, it gave a perspective on Nietzsche that was more sort of less willful. Nietzsche is a lot about the will and the will to power and, self-overcoming. And there's a lot of, at least to the superficial reader as I was, it's a lot about, you can do this. But Heidegger was more non-dual, actually. It's about
what did you
go.
Yeah. Can I ask, because I think for some listeners, I love it and I'm immediately kind of hooked, but I also know that some listeners or watchers or viewers won't have that click. And a question that comes to me is that, do you remember any phrase or any shift when you moved from Nietzsche to Heidegger that you can kind of give to the listener? Like, oh yeah, that was kind of a click.
Yeah. Heidegger uses a word that actually comes from the Christian mystic Eckhart. It's a word in German called Gelassenheit. And it has in English it's translated as releasement, which is a good translation, I think, but it's in German it has something, lassen is a sort of releasing or letting go. It also carries a connotation of surrender, actually, or opening. So there's a sort of releasement in the way that you are in the world. Heidegger would say, Heidegger speaks about being in the world in our way of experiencing the world and embodying the world, so to speak. And there's a way of being in the world that's more loose, you could say, less forceful, and more open to the Heidegger would call the mystery of being. So openness to the mystery through Gelassenheit.
And then mystery, I believe, has this connotation of hidden, right? Something, the hidden nature of reality.
Yeah, exactly. That's also something that really fascinated me about Heidegger, that what Heidegger calls being is both something that is revealing itself, but is at the same time concealing itself. So there's a movement in being of revealing, showing forth, and then concealing and withdrawing. And there will always be this withdrawing in which we are drawn into the mystery through its withdrawing. Sorry for my pronunciation, but I could feel that in my meditation practice quite intuitively, that I was drawn to something, but that thing that I was drawn to was always concealing itself. And then suddenly you're in a dance, you're in a movement with something greater than yourself, which is showing itself and revealing and concealing. And there's I guess poetry would be the right way to sort of approach this, because it is the territory of the poets, and that was something that really spoke to me as well when I started reading Heidegger. I started reading a lot of poetry at the same time. Hölderlin and Rilke, Novalis, and there was, I recognized, wow, there's something here in the way that language is opening up this experience of the mystery.
Wow.
So, and then I really started getting a flair for that, and then could see, okay, that this was something that I didn't find in Nietzsche's way of speaking about this. Nietzsche's way of speaking was very inspiring and very, also really creative and explosive. But it lacked some humility, I think.
Yeah. Receptivity, something like
receptivity, that. Exactly. Yeah.
Although I believe, and I'm really not a Nietzsche knower, I know more Merleau-Ponty and Husserl, but he did with Zarathustra, that was basically him channeling a spirit, right? So there was this element in him as well. Do you know anything about that?
Definitely. But from a Jungian perspective, at least, the problem there with Nietzsche was that he identified too much with Zarathustra. And that he was, in Jungian psychology, we speak about being inflated, that the ego can become inflated by the archetypal world. Because the archetypal world spirits, if you like, they carry a tremendous amount of energy. And if the ego is sort of swallowing that energy and sort of appropriating it, then you get what is called an inflation, and you identify with it, and then you're just swept off the ground, so to speak. So this would be Jung's sort of interpretation of what happened to Nietzsche. That he ended up losing it and becoming mentally sick.
It's like a possession, right?
Yeah, it's complete.
From a muse to a possession or something.
Complete possession. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think for Jung, Nietzsche really had an opening, and he was on to the right thing. There's a lot in Jung that really recognizes the truth and validity of what Nietzsche is talking about, or was talking about, writing about. But that he didn't have the means to handle it, to handle that power. And I guess a similar thing happened for Jung when he was writing his Red Book. That the spirit was knocking on the door, so to speak, and Jung was really afraid that he would lose it, and become psychotic. And Jung had worked with psychotic patients, most of his career at that time, so he knew what it looked like, and he knew what was coming. And then, Jung developed this practice called active imagination as a way to actually navigate in this opening, and to sort of engage these forces without becoming identified and without becoming swallowed, without becoming inflated, basically. So Jung really paid a lot of attention to sort of separating himself from the archetypes and having a dialogue with them rather than, merging with them.
It's very interesting just that you said that about Jung, because I was just thinking, I wonder if something like that happened to Jung, and then you literally just said it. So
yes,
I like how we're already syncing up. Quite Jungian, perhaps. But a question I want to ask you, kind of maybe more personal, but it sounds like, because you also expressed earlier that you had, and I think have, a deep interest and a practice of Tibetan Buddhism. I think Jung also studied the East a lot, but you probably know that better than me. But of course, in the East, if we're talking about Buddhism, there's a lot of no self, disidentification. Do you think Jung was influenced by that or helped by that stream of awareness?
Yeah, this is a good question, Hans. And it opens up a whole lot of topics and discussions. Also around the self and selflessness, where there's quite a difference there between Jung's perspective and Buddhism, actually, that I feel is important. But to answer your question more to begin with, no, at the time being when he started writing the Red Book and had these experiences, that was in 1913, just before the outbreak of First World War, and Jung sort of actually intuits something collective. He has these massive dreams about Europe being flooded by blood and chaos, and a few months after, First World War breaks out, and so there was this, recognition that the unconscious has these collective depths, definitely, and that the ego is not in control. The ego is not the center of the psyche. It might be the center of consciousness, but it's not the center of the totality of the psyche. There are greater forces alive, and to these forces one must bow, Jung says, and this is what he describes as the sort of the fall of the hero, because he was very identified with the heroic sort of ego, I can do this, I can master, I can, achieve. If there's a will, there's a way, sort of. And then through this experience, at the outbreak of First World War, Jung really had to recognize, no, I'm not the master in my own house here. So there's a feeling there that the self, the I, is not the one in control, so to speak. And there's a whole sort of dimension of the unconscious, which is collective, and which can both be destructive, but also very constructive and very creative. And that the I has to be in a constructive relationship with the unconscious. And I think, Jung's worry about Buddhism in the East would be that, if we work too much on deconstructing the ego, then there won't actually be any center in the consciousness who is able to relate to and in a way, what Jung recognizes that the archetypal forces, the unconscious, they need to be refined. They need to be transformed. They need to be transfigured. They need to be worked on alchemically, in the vessel. And for that, the ego is very, very important. So we actually need quite a solid, quite a stable ego. That's not to mean that, that's not to say rigid, because often a rigid ego is actually quite, unable to be receptive and to be in the stance. So ego needs to be flexible enough, and grounded enough in order to have this exchange with the unconscious, this confrontation with the unconscious.
So what comes to me then, because now the word ego is being used a lot, and it still makes sense to me, but I also feel this kind of strange. I just don't understand, but I have a kind of intuition. I want to check with you how you see that, because I believe that very, very broadly put, Buddhism is right, that there is ultimately no fixed ego, or this sense of self that we have is not this thing that we think it is, of course.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you describe is that but we need. And the funny thing is, when you were describing what we do need, it's almost like we need certain qualities of maybe robustness or openness or probably honesty. And how do you see that? How can you explain on that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually interesting, because one area where Jung sort of comes close to Buddhism is that he actually sees the ego as a complex, and that means that the ego is sort of is put together by a lot of different components, so you when you look at the ego, you cannot find a core and say, that's me, so in that way, Jung and Buddhism really agrees that, the ego is formed by a lot of different experiences and a lot of, Buddhism would say contraction also around something, a sense of self. And I think, I think Jung would agree with that. I think what Jung recognized in the way that Westerners approach Eastern philosophy and Buddhism is there's a tendency to actually, how to say, depreciate the ego. It's a very sort of we need to get rid of the ego, I'm not supposed to be, egoic, the ego should be removed. And I think Jung really warned about that mistake. And in a way, there was a sort of almost anticipating a sort of Western spiritual bypassing, the ego is just something we can get rid of so we can reach these deeper samadhi states or whatever it is, And I think Jung really said to us and warned us, no, you're not getting rid of the ego that easy. You need the ego, So I think, in many ways, my meditation teacher is a Jungian psychologist and a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. And for him, there's no real conflict in bringing these perspectives together, because he's saying the same, basically. We need a really, solid, grounded ego in order to enter into these more non-dual states, And I guess it's sort of like it goes together with what I was saying earlier, that, that the ego is not supposed to be rigid, but flexible, And the way of attaining a more flexible ego is also the ability to see through it, as empty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
something like that came to me also when you were speaking now, just this image of, and also, my meditation teacher, I always say, I don't think he would call me his student, but he's definitely my teacher, is Michael Taft. I really appreciate him. And he always says, I believe he said something like, keep your ego. It's very healthy. It's useful. You can't go to the supermarket without an ego.
Yes.
More or less.
Yes.
And then the image that comes to me is that, I think that sense of self is really useful if it's transparent and fluid.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's useful, and it is not an enemy.
No,
I like that
exactly.
also. It's not an enemy.
Yeah.
And another interesting angle that I want to explore with you is, you mentioned your meditation teacher, who is both Jungian and Tibetan Buddhist. I heard you earlier speak about active imagination, which is an enormous part, as I understand it, of Tibetan Buddhism, right? Imagining mandalas and visualization. How does that come in your practice and in your work? How does that play a part?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Hans. I think this is where you really you hit the nail on where my big passion is in this whole Jungian psychology, because just to say that active imagination was traditionally not seen as such an important part of Jungian psychology. Traditionally, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was more like, there's this method of active imagination and you can use it therapeutically, but, and then the Red Book comes out, and then, you realize, wow, active imagination is the whole foundation of, how Jung worked with the unconscious. And, you suddenly discover how much, how influential that practice, but it's actually not only a practice. It's to use Heidegger's phrase, it's a way of being in the world, where you have this openness towards the imaginal nature of reality, of the psyche. Jung would say psyche is image, that,
Wow.
at the deepest level, the psyche is image, and it's image creating. It's what he calls mythopoetic. So this sort of like the depth are constantly speaking in images, and our way of, of engaging and dialoguing and being in connection and touch with the depths, that would ultimately be active imagination. That would be a way of describing how to engage in that relationship with the depth of being. So how does that relate to Buddhism? I think Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism in particularly, because in Theravada Buddhism, there's often, and in some traditions in Tibetan Buddhism also a tendency to sort of look at the image as something you should just see through, as illusory, and that you shouldn't spend too much time, being with the image. You should just let it go and and focus on emptiness. But in especially the tantric tradition, there's a lot of images. There's a lot of deities. There's a lot of mandalas. There's a lot of visualization, which is definitely recognizing the value and the importance of the imagination. My sort of sometimes where I get a little bit stuck there is that a lot of these images, they're sort of ready-made, and they can become a little bit too stiff, a little bit too dogmatic. Then you visualize a deity, Manjushri or Tara or Chenrezig, and then, Chenrezig looks like this, and he's doing this, and he's sitting like this, and he's had 3 of that and 4 of this, and and then you get a sort of like a little bit of a stifling of the imagination, I actually feel. Where, active imagination, you give a little bit more freedom to the image, allow it to move, allow for some action, allow for some movement, and there's a dialogue, where in the tantric tradition, you really recognize the autonomy of the archetype and of the image and the deity in this case, and you receive and you sort of enter into a relationship, but the relationship is sort of confined a bit within institutional limits. let's call it that.
Yeah.
Let's call it that.
And you see kind of hindrance there in your practice with clients when they kind of stuck on this image. Can you say more about that?
Exactly. So the way I work with it with clients is often, that that the image arises more spontaneously. I don't say, here is an image of the mother archetype, let's do some active imagination with this. I always, invite the client if they have a feeling, for example, I have a pain in my chest, in my heart. Okay, close your eyes, feel into it. And then I ask, is there an image that comes to you? And then, I get this image, And then the image arises spontaneously from the body. So it's the body itself speaking. It feels like a knife, cutting through. Okay, let's, this knife, how does that feel? Oh, it feels cold and feels sharp, And then, okay. And then we sort of, we start working with the image, I might ask, do you know where that knife, you have a feeling of where that knife is coming from or who's holding a knife, and then, we enter into a sort of a little drama together, but always with the focus on, of following the image in a more spontaneous way, more open way. Yeah.
In this way, I imagine it becomes more individualized, kind of more tailor-made of an unfoldment for the client.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then there's a whole sort of, to add this, there's a whole sort of connection with dream work also, that often some of the images that we work with in my practice is sort of coming through dreams and coming through dream work, and then there's an image from a dream, and okay, let's explore that, and we feel into it in the body, and then you use active imagination to dream the dream onwards, so to speak,
I definitely want to talk more about that with you, and I would love that to be the next topic. And there's two things I want to say before that. One is that I also work as a coach, which is very different than what you do, but it also has some similarities. And what I'm taking from you is the importance of the image. So I'm just kind of, I'm kind of holding that as an inspiration.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to just go back 1 second about, for instance, you mentioned Chandresik or Avalokiteshvara, how it's also known, the deity. And I have actually been doing that practice, and I want to get back to it because I love it. And I actually have a kind of Jungian insight about it that I already had. But I'm curious how you resonate or not with that, is that I believe that the power of having such a specific image has something to do with that specific image having been imagined by thousands of people for hundreds of years. And it has a kind of its own frequency that way that you can tune into almost archetypally. I'm curious if you resonate with that at all.
Yeah, no, definitely I do. I feel it has tremendous value also, that the image is more fixed. And that there is a resonance and a sort of residue almost from all the past practitioners and all the from a lineage and a tradition there, definitely. And I guess also what I would add to that is the value of having a more sort of institutional fixed, setup here is that there's a safety in that the container is already, structured. So so there is a tremendous value in sort of following, some practices that has, been developed through thousands of years, in that they also sort of, the boundaries sort of also create a container, a vessel in which, the practitioner and that relationship is safeguarded in a way. So active imagination, it's often done, in a therapeutic setting. You can, of course, also do it alone, but, who knows what will come up from the depth, and if you don't have any ritual sort of container to hold that, then, it might potentially be destructive, damaging, re-traumatizing, yeah.
Have you noticed that in your practice that a client was doing this work and you were able to kind of help them not have a destructive experience?
Yeah, I've had clients who had, let's put it like this, how to say this, where the unconscious, contents are overwhelming and chaotic, and that, that the client feels like this is too much, I open to the imagination. It's just, a lot of chaotic stuff coming through. And also clients who use the imagination, with good intention, but it's actually, using them, so to speak, because there is a sort of a side of the unconscious that's quite sort of possessive, you could say, almost as if the unconscious wants to swallow the I, swallow the ego. And in that case, the imagination can be really, wow, there's a lot of images and, wow, there's a lot of dreams and this is very exciting. But there's not really any relationship to it. There's not really any dialogue with it. And there, you actually need a separation between the ego and the unconscious before there can be a relationship.
And how do you do that? How do you as a therapist?
There, you actually work on strengthening the ego. You would actually really be supportive and, ego strength, getting up in the morning, eating some good food, going to work, whatever, and then also just, by working therapeutically, you get a container in which you can differentiate a bit more in the material, and you can, hopefully at least become more conscious of, the different parts of, in alchemy, they talk about the prima materia, it's this mass of confusion to begin with, and what you want to do there is you want to start to separate and differentiate and to get a little bit of, wiggle room in this, sticky, heavy, confusing mass, and there, there's also an alchemical sort of ground rule. You need a container, you need a good vessel in order for the material to start to transform. So just being in a therapeutic container and looking at this, this material, can itself, help to separate. Yeah.
So if somebody's feeling this overwhelm of the imagination of the subconscious, you're helping them to kind of create structure, create some kind of distance almost, so that you have some more choice at how you engage with it instead of being overwhelmed with it.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
In alchemy, you want to separate. You want this spirit to actually separate from the material, and then later they can join together again and create what is called a conjunctio, a union. But you need to separate before you can actually enter into a union, and that applies for alchemy, psychology, and for for relationships also, romantic relationships. If you're too codependent with your partner, you need some separation, and then from there you can unite in a more clean way. Same thing with the unconscious. Yeah.
That's really, really cool. And now also you mentioned, of course, dream work, right? So, and this is also, we talked a little bit beforehand about, we could talk a bit about dreams. There's this huge part of your work that is active imagination. How does dream work play a part in your practice?
Yeah, thank you, Hans. Let me begin by saying I love active imagination, but I equally love dream work. And for me, they go together also. Dreams are so fascinating when you start, working with dreams. I've had that in my own life personally. Some dreams that I really feel, wow, they really showed me something that I couldn't have figured out rationally, consciously. They pointed
Can you
away. Like what comes to me is a dream I had when I was 29, actually. In the dream, I experienced myself dying, actually. I witnessed my own death. And then I was in this Italian sort of villa, something from the Renaissance. And it wasn't me because I was dead, I just, the dream consciousness, whatever was showing me this child lying on the floor of this Italian villa. And there was 3 sort of really beautiful women, but very sort of, like a Renaissance painting, Botticelli or something, and they were looking at this baby, and the baby was just radiant. For me, this dream I had when I was 29, it was a sort of a death and a rebirth dream. And I just, finished my studies at the university, and I knew that something new was, about to take place, but I didn't really know what to do and what to make of myself, and where to begin, so to speak. And then I had this dream, and I really recognized, wow, there's a death process here, and something new is ready to be born. And without, making the connection at that time, I decided to buy a one-way ticket to Guatemala and leave my old, my old life, so to speak. And, months later, and this, journey that I had to Guatemala working with cacao, and I find myself in the jungle, and in this jungle where I am, there's a cave, and I'm invited to do a darkness retreat in this cave, and then I'm sort of back and forth, oh, this sounds a bit crazy with the cave and doing a darkness retreat, and lying in there with all, in the middle of the jungle, and then one night in the jungle, we're out deep in a native community in the jungle, and I'm lying in this hammock, and it's sort of really raining, and then this dream comes back to me, and really forcefully, and then I feel this death process, and I feel like, okay, this cave thing actually might be the perfect place for me to, to go through this death and rebirth process. And I really felt at the moment that the dream was sort of supporting me in that, decision. And there was a sense of like a deeper meaning in the journey that I was on at the moment. And I really felt like, again, this feeling that, the dream is not just my repressed unconscious material, but it's the depth of being, addressing me.
Wow.
And then suddenly you get a sense of being in a relationship to the mystery, so to speak. And that really, there's just such a revolution for the ego to say, there's something greater here. There's something bigger asking me to sort of embody and live a journey and live individuation, Jung would call it, It's not my, it's not my construction. That's not my narrative. That's not my sort of, this is a nice story, but it's a story. It's a feeling of, now I hope I don't sound too grandiose, but a feeling of a call or a destiny, that's waiting for you, and that, that you have a responsibility towards.
Yeah. No, it doesn't sound grandiose to me. It sounds beautiful. Was that also the time, because I think I'm pretty sure that you had one time that you were maybe stuck in work life and that you made a decision to go travel to another country. I think that's later probably in your life. Is that correct?
I did a few journeys. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, but I think, I was working, as a teacher actually in elementary school. I was teaching philosophy and psychology. It was great. I really, liked teaching, liked philosophy, but I think I was a bit stuck in the work life, but also stuck in sort of intellectual, philosophical sort of identification with, being clever and being, intelligent and being, knowing a lot. And I think a lot of that sort of knowledge that I had from university had to be taken from me, so to speak, or at least I had to separate again. I had to sort of say, disidentify with it and say, my self-worth, my identity, my being is not sort of defined by that. So I had to go in the opposite direction and really work a lot with my feelings and my emotions, my body, something more intuitive, creative. I started playing music. And the journey, I bought a hang drum, and that was before they really got popular in 2015. And then I just, perhaps, I stopped reading books. I started playing music, and now I can look back at it and say, wow, that was such a drastic, change. But I think it was a necessary process for me in becoming more whole. And this was something Jung also helped me to understand, that, Jung's focus was not on perfection and being perfect at something. Then I would just have, excelled in philosophy and, I need to write a PhD and But, if you want to be whole, you actually have to, work on what Jung calls your inferior function, what size of your being is least developed, And this can be very difficult for the ego to acknowledge, and it can feel like a huge defeat for a lot of people. Oh, I was so good at this, and suddenly, why should I give this up? But something is stuck. It feels barren. Something is out of touch with the depths, and then the unconscious forces. Sometimes it feels like it is something that's being forced on you. Yeah. And I think listening to dreams, coming back to dream work, can give us this feeling of like, okay, what is the unconscious actually asking for here? Yeah. One thing I ask a client, how are you doing? We get a whole story about our, problems and then I ask, but what is the dream saying? And then, suddenly, I get a very different answer, And then it's That's exactly cool, sort of the thing or the spot that we need to work on. It's actually coming through the dream and not through what I think I should be working on. And the same goes for me as a therapist, because, I don't know, But if we can listen together through dreams to what the unconscious is saying, then it's a very different approach. Yeah. I really like this kind of switch and I call it a switch because I think in the mainstream typically, and of course mainstream, I mean
Western materialistic kind of, scientific or scientistic paradigm, if something is imagined or imaginal, that's actually a phrase to dismiss something.
Yeah.
But in a dream, oh no, that was just a dream, right?
Yeah,
They was
yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
no,
Nothing
that
but
was
a
a
dream.
dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I find cool, and also I'm looking at my book of Kripal, Mr. Kripal, who I also had a conversation with, and he also talks about, or I kind of withdrew more from him, is taking responsibility for our imagination. And I wonder,
Yeah.
I want to stay with dreams, but I just wanted to name that kind of, no, it's actually, and he calls it, well, not quite, but it's a flip, right? We're flipping
Yeah.
it. It's not that, oh, it's just a dream. No, dream is very important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm curious because by the way, I have an enormously active dream life. I love my dream life.
Yeah.
And it tends to be more active when I'm not in a kind of normal work mode, which I'm now. I'm not. I'm kind of on a sabbatical, and my dreams are kind of taking up again, and I love my dreams.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and just like you, I think I've had some dreams that seem to be more than just a dream. I mean, I've had certain I've literally had spiritual lessons from dreams.
Yes, yeah.
But also one, and then I want to check with you if it's okay that we look at that dream, if you're okay with that,
I would
because
love to.
yeah, so there's this one dream that I had, and it's years ago, but it was pivotal for me. And I think that what happened in that dream is that basically my dark side became conscious.
Yes.
That was always there. Shall I just say the dream? Otherwise, we're just kind of theorizing.
Yeah, please feel free.
Yeah. So the notion that I got. Okay, let me take 2 steps back.
Yeah,
the scene itself was, I was kind of stumbling upon a dungeon. Kind of this concrete cement chamber with no windows. And the distinct notion I had at that moment is that it was a very unlikely event that I found that dungeon or that cell or that whatever you want to call it. There was this kind of notion of, oh, this is not expected or something like this.
Yeah. And you were in the dungeon, or you were stumbling on it, or?
Yeah, I was stumbling on it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And
so
then
you were not
inside,
trapped in it?
Well, that's the question, because inside I saw a person.
Yeah.
And he was chained to the dungeon or something.
Yeah.
And my impulse was to, it's going to get a little bit dark here, people. My impulse was to humiliate, to hurt, and to dominate that person.
Yeah.
And then what happened? There was something happened in real life. I'm convinced that it was real. That it turned my actual physical neck around.
Wow.
And of course you can say, oh, that's part of the dream, but I really don't think that was something that it did. And I have my own explanations of what happened there, but of course what do you think that means?
So it turned your neck around. So you approached this figure that you wanted to dominate, and then it turned your head around. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you show this book called The Flip, because it feels very much like a flip for me. That the rational ego wants to dominate let's call him a shadow figure, and actually it's a shadow it has something to show you, actually. Yeah, beautiful, Hans. How did it feel to have this experience?
It felt very important. I was not scared, even though I had the distinct experience that it was basically kind of a possession experience.
Yeah.
But it was not scary. It felt more that this is important.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of what he was trying to show you?
Something like, I have power over you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it turned my neck around.
Yeah. And did your relationship with this figure or with this shadow change after that?
Well, in a sense, so I'll just say how I took it.
Yeah.
Because it's not that I had more encounters with that, although I do think I had encounters with it embodying me from the subconscious or the unconscious in very harmful ways.
Yeah.
But what I believe that is my, it is exactly my, let's say, dark tendencies of domination and torture and, humiliation.
Yeah.
And I put that away because it is in me and I put it away. And I think I know where it came from because, let's say, I don't want to name names, but 2 close family members were dominating, humiliating, torturing me as I was a child.
Yeah.
And so that came imprinted in me.
Yeah.
That's my own kind of analysis. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. That sounds completely reasonable. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing this, Hans. I know it can be a bit vulnerable to to share shadow aspects of ourselves, but I feel that these are parts that are also collective, and that we all sort of have to some extent, and in one way or another. And I guess this is what is so so liberating and beautiful about dream work, is that that you can look at these parts and you can sort of you can I don't want to say own them, because this I think this is the danger, is that we try consciously to say, okay, now let's do shadow work, and then we try to sort of get a handle on the shadow, and and then it's a subtle way of colonializing, the unconscious. Then there's still an ego wanting to conquer, wanting to control, wanting to, So I think there's a real sort of value and beauty in this dream that, the unconscious is actually saying, no. It's the other way around, actually,
Yeah.
So, and I think, there's a real lesson in how to approach the unconscious here, with a bit more sort of humility, and saying, okay, the way that I approach the unconscious, the unconscious will to some extent mirror that also. So if I come with an approach of wanting to dominate, wanting to control, wanting to humiliate, then, we get a smack right back in our face, and then we end up being the ones dominated and controlled and humiliated. So I think, this dream is a perfect example of, it's a lesson and how to relate to the unconscious. And in this case, a shadow aspect,
Yeah.
So the interesting thing there is, if I would work with you more therapeutically in a setting, we would really try to build a relationship with this character, ask him, what he feels, what his experiences are, how he's been humiliated, and really try to see a value in him and try to sort of invite him out of the dungeon, so to speak, and bring him up to daylight, shine a light on him, give him some love, say, yes, I want to be friends with you.
Yeah. Sometimes I have the thought that it's become clear to me also through some work that I've been doing, is that there's a tendency in me, I won't say I'm completely identified with it, but there is a tendency in me to really deeply reject myself.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I have to work with sometimes. And there's also been this imprint of literally being bullied, but also tortured.
Yes.
As a child, that has left me with some super deep, painful imprints. And those, I don't know, you can tell me, but I have the sense that what's imprinted wants to be expressed. It's literally like you said, if you want to, well, you didn't quite say that, but if you, suppress something, it will come up, like this famous ball under the water kind of metaphor. And I really like what you just said about, let's give that some love. Yeah. Do you see that? This is maybe a global question, but do you see that your work as a therapist, and you have all these modalities that you work with, of course, dream work, nature work, active imagination, you give courses, everything. It seems like the true gift is love, to just say it plainly.
Yeah.
Do you resonate with that?
Yes and no.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah. You want to expand?
No, I think the danger there would be to say, to have a sort of one-sided view on the goal and the, on life and the unconscious and the ideal, Jung always stressed, and I really agree with that the world is made of opposites. There's love and hate, good and bad, ugly and beauty, constructive, destructive, and you will never get rid of this opposition in life. So the best that we can do is to really recognize both sides of the coin, so to speak, and find ways of holding the opposites, you would say. So if we say, it's only, we should only focus on love, it's love, then, it's easy to suppress the other side of the coin and say it doesn't exist. And I think Jung, this was his whole critique of Christianity and of Western culture, was that, we've been blindly, worshipping the light, the good, the reasonable, striving towards that while neglecting the dark side of our being.
Yeah.
And now it's time to look at the dark side, just as in your dream, bring that up into the light. And of course, that requires some love, and there's love as a sort of foundation to, to work with the dark side. So if you mean love as a way of integrating and sort of looking at the darker sides of life and of being, then yes, I could say yes. Yeah. Does that make sense?
The connection just went a little bit bad for the first time. Could you just repeat that very last sentence about if you think or if you mean?
So if you mean love as a way of holding the dark side, then I could say yes, But if you mean love as a way of getting away from something, or denying the other side, then, I feel there's a potential danger there. And I feel, like this is a deeper sort of approach to dream work. 2 seconds.
Yeah, so I'm just going to wait a second.
I don't know why the connection is a bit
frozen for me.
It's a bit unstable.
I'm going to wait until you come back.
Hans, are you there? Hans, are you there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now there's some movement. Again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm here.
Okay. Sorry. I think it's
I know that you're there too.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Okay.
I trust. Yeah. But I got your. I think. Let me see. So what I'm getting is that you would say that yes, of course. If you mean with love that we embrace both the dark and the light. Both the beautiful swan and also the shit that he shits. Let's just name something random. Then yes, but not, we're going to focus on the light and just disregard the darkness, because that's exactly the opposite of what Jung would suggest and what you value. I completely mean that. I mean embracing my self-rejection as well as my self-love. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to give you that, perspective on individuation and dream work, because Jung's idea was that the Christian God, was only light, only good, only, love. And that created a sort of counterpart in the devil, and actually that, from a Jungian point of view, God is both. God is both light and dark, and we need to if we want to have a living, constructive relationship with God, now I'm just using this word, but we could also say the depth of being, mystery, spirit, we need to recognize that God has both sides.
Oh, no.
And that again. God, the depth of...
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Am I here?
Yeah, you're back.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Perhaps it's my connection.
Yeah, maybe it's me. I don't know.
That actually the dream work, to come back to that, is a way of not only individuating us, but actually individuating God. So that the Godhead requires individuation as well. We, when we are working on our darkness, we're also working on the darkness of the collective, that we have a responsibility towards transforming, refining, integrating.
Yeah.
So that gives us sort of like a more collective feeling and meaning to dream work, actually. As of course, it's something about our development, but it's also about our relationship to the divine, if you like. And how we can be in service to that, actually, because the divine God is not perfect. It is incomplete and needs us to become more conscious of itself. Sorry for this. It's a bit complicated, but I want just to give that sort of perspective on dream work as well. So
no, it's super, super interesting, actually. And a few things are kind of happening in my, when I'm listening to you. One is that it really seems that this individuation, when it also works by tapping into the collective unconscious, is as well a movement towards a more collective self as a more identified personal self. Do you see it like that?
Yeah, I think you can see it like that. The individuation is both something that really connects us with the collective and the transcendent, but it's also really something that requires us to materialize almost, and requires confinement in a limited, this is me, this is what I do, If we want to have that openness to the eternal, we need to really concretize, actually, or materialize. So only in this confinement of being me, being a psychotherapist in this room, doing this, can I have an opening. So it's pulling us in both directions to become more manifest, but also to become more open.
That just sounds right to me. It's kind of affirming both end.
Yes,
I love that way of both end. Yeah, it's matter and it is spirit. It is
exactly.
It is me and it is us, and it is the darkness and it is the light. There's also a form of non-duality.
Yes, exactly.
And the other thing I wanted to say,
bringing them together, matter and spirit, bringing them together, and this is what we need the imagination for. It is through the imagination that matter and spirit can meet. And this is why it's so devastating that we've lost connection to the imaginal, because it's sort of splitting us apart. It's splitting matter and spirit apart. Imagination is what is binding them together. So when I ask a client, for example, to feel into an image, I'm taking that image, which is the spiritual, and I'm making it more material, more concrete in the body, And the other way around, if there's a feeling in the body of, wow, it's hurting in my heart, where's the image? Then I'm connecting with spirit through something material.
Right.
or something. And so always, making the spirit coagulate alchemically, making that more concrete and making the material more,
Yeah.
sublimating it.
So let's see if I get it right. So it is there's an imagination, or I'm doing this, but it's basically coming from the deep in a Jungian sense. And how I concretize it is to relate to it with my body.
Yeah, exactly. Or to paint it, or to write it, or to make clay, ceramic, whatever, making it. Yeah.
Mm.
But
and does it?
often in
Yeah.
psychotherapy, it would be really sort of grounding it in the body. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other way around, because I think you also said it kind of separates us when we don't take the imagination seriously. So how does the
Yes.
imagination work to bind us together as humanity?
Yeah. This is a bit a more sort of broad question than what goes on in therapy, but I think the imaginal, how that binds us together, is that it's from a Jungian perspective made up of archetypes and collective images. That there are images, archetypes that speaks to us collectively, and when we have a shared living relationship to these archetypes and these figures, we feel connected to each other.
Right.
Yeah. So,
sharing about our imagination, for instance, would be one way to relate.
Yeah, definitely. And recognizing, wow, I have that same feeling, I have that same image, I was at this grief workshop in the weekend, lamenting. You lament over something, and one of the exercises there was, to connect with an image, and then you had an image, and then we were invited to walk around in the room and share our image, and then every time we found someone who we shared an image with, or like a theme in the image, we took the other person by the hand, and we sort of started connecting in the room, and it was so beautiful to see, wow, I have that same theme, I have the same grief, and it might have a slightly different image, but the image is pointing to the same. So that's one way of looking at it,
Yeah. I'm just
sorry, Hans.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I'm just also excited the whole time.
I think religion. Religion used to have that function. Religious figures. And having having something. Religio means binding together. Something that connects us and binds us. Both to the transcendent, but also to each other. And I think we've lost our connection to the religious, because it was so dogmatic and so sort of institutionalized, and from a Jungian point of view, one-sided, and that God was only, so it had to fall, but we're still living in this vacuum, where we need new containers, we need new structures, we need new ways of honoring and connecting to the imaginal, we need ceremonies, rituals, I think.
So what's happening in me, can I say? Is that what I'm getting from this is because you've mentioned the word non-dual a few times, non-duality. Of course, my podcast is called Non-Dual Communication. So I love this kind of ultimate non-separateness. And what I'm getting from you is that the deep spirit, the deep psyche, or the deep soul is shared. And it is deeply imaginal.
Yes.
And so the imagination is not just a portal for my self-understanding or a vessel, but it's also my connection to you. And one way in which we all have that experience on a daily basis is if you are telling me your experience, I can be like, oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
that thing. It's, I
Yes.
see it. When you understand somebody, you're seeing their perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
And
there
I
was
feel,
another thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, please.
but it's a little bit, it's a bit off topic, but I do want to name it because you said earlier that, the let's say Christianity has focused so much on the light, and judged everything that is dark as bad, and that's the devil.
Yeah.
Although I think in the mystic traditions, that's probably not how it was, but in kind of,
mainstream
everyday
Christianity.
mainstream, like what a dangerous practice. And now you see that, of course, with all the darkness that has always been there,
Yes.
but kept in the dark, and
Yes.
just a lot of shit that's been coming out. And I just wanted to say those two things.
Yeah.
I'm curious where you're at right now.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like sharing an experience that Jung had, that he writes about in his Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is a sort of a semi-autobiographical work. And in this work, Jung shares an experience he had when he was 11. And Jung's father was a Christian, was a preacher in the Swiss Reformed Church, and very sort of Protestant, Puritan. And then one day Jung is walking home from school. He's 11 years old, and he comes across the square in this Swiss town Basel that he lives in. And then, sun is shining. He looks at the cathedral and he thinks, wow, this is so beautiful. Everything is so nice and light, and the cathedral, the sun, and he's thinking, oh, what a wonderful God who made all this, And then, there's a sudden, shock in Jung, and he cannot go on thinking. And he comes home and he's sick for several days, actually, because something is, pressing to be thought through, to be thought to the end. And then finally, after several days of, being sick, Jung says, okay, let it come. And he gets this image of God in the sky, the cathedral, the sun. And then suddenly, out of the blue, so to speak, God leaves this massive shit, right on the roof of the cathedral, and the cathedral, crumbles, and and he felt a huge relief after having this vision, Jung, actually, even though it didn't really match his image of this, wonderful God, that's just pure and light and love, and then in Jung's imagination, in the imagination, not just Jung's, in the imagination, God leaves a huge turd on the cathedral roof. And and this was sort of like really just, at 11 years old, he has this vision, and it sort of foreshadows everything that he's gonna, work with later on in his life, because it is exactly this problem of taking the dark side of the divine seriously and saying, if we do not recognize and honor the dark side of God, he will, it will destroy all the institutions, all the buildings that we built for him, because it won't be the living, full psyche, It has to embody that. Our image of the God has to embody both sides. Otherwise, we will just swing between one and the other, two extremes, and we'll play out the dark side unconsciously, destructively.
Yeah. I mean, I fear to say amen to that, but that's often a phrase that comes with something that sounds true. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. I think I read that book, by the way, that you mentioned, Jung's autobiography, but it's super long ago. I don't even know if I finished it, but Jung is really amazing.
Yeah.
Is there anything about Jung that you think, he got that wrong, or he completely missed that, or anything like that?
Good question. Yes, there's a lot of, there's a lot of spots where I feel like Jung is incomplete, and I think, with my philosophical background, there's a lot of what Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty is onto, in phenomenology that, it's lacking. There's a lot of stuff lacking in Jung, and there's also a meditative practice depth that's lacking that I don't find in Jung, that I need to go to Tibetan Buddhism for. So there's a lot of stuff lacking in Jung, and I think one thing that annoys me with Jung is that he never sort of owns his ontological standpoint. He always says, in his works, oh, I'm just an empiricist, I just look at psychic facts and then, I present them, But when you look at Jung a little bit deeper, there's a lot of ontological assumptions, which I think most of them, I resonate with. But I wish that he would have owned a bit more of his ontology, actually, and say, this is what I'm, discovering. I'm discovering an enchanted cosmos. I'm discovering that matter is alive and ensouled and that it is speaking to us, He never says that explicitly. And I think he was, a bit stuck in being a scientist sometimes, seeing himself as a doctor, a psychiatrist and a scientist that, is presenting facts. More than actually a philosopher and a mystic. And I think he was afraid to be judged as a mystic, be judged, as an irrational, I think this was the time that he was living in, but today you say, okay, come out of the closet, and own it. So, he was a bit split, I think, Jung, that he had a really like a mystic side, and then he had the scientific side, and I think he struggled to bring them together, actually. And that sort of can sometimes annoy me a bit.
I guess when you have such a deep relationship with somebody like Jung in your work, there's also kind of this little beefs that you have.
Yes, exactly.
I think it shows your depth of understanding and practice that you can, that you can name that even. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I feel we're kind of, naturally flowing towards kind of a closure. Do you think that there's anything that's like, oh no, but this is still in the air, or something that you'd love to add, or a thought that wasn't expressed that you'd like to?
No, I just want to say thank you, Hans, for this space and this invitation opportunity. And that I really enjoyed, talking to her, and I feel like it would be fun just to, to carry on the conversation in one way or the other, So I feel there's a lot, that we could learn from each other. So thank you. And then, one thing we didn't talk so much about was the whole sort of connection to nature and to earth and nature coaching. And I think that's, perhaps that's a topic for another time.
Well, it does sound very interesting. If you have a bit more time, I would like to hear that.
Yeah. Perhaps
I do want to go.
Briefly hint at it, if we have a few more minutes.
Well, how long do you have left for our time?
5 minutes, something like that.
All right. No, please go ahead. Let's hear it.
So just perhaps a little invitation for a way of making that connection to the imaginal. Because I think a one way that this split between spirit and matter has also played out is that through Christianity and Western philosophy, we've been so accustomed to thinking about matter as something dead, something, mechanical, something mechanistic, and spirit, thought, intellect, imagination also to some regard as something, that's not connected to matter, and it's two separate worlds, a very Cartesian sort of split there. And I think, one of Jung's huge endeavors was to heal this split, actually. And the way that, he saw this was through the eyes of the alchemists. So there's a whole sort of strand of Jungian psychology that deals with alchemy. And I mentioned it a few times now, the metaphors of alchemy, but basically what the alchemist sought was to, to produce the philosopher's stone, to make gold, as they commonly say. But it was also a way of bringing together spirit and matter and recognizing matter as something ensouled, something alive, something intelligent, that there's a wisdom in matter that we've neglected. And that was also one consequence of the Christian God image, is that God is up there in the sky and that he's light and so on. But according to Jung, there's equally a side of the God that's trapped in matter. Speaking of the dungeon, actually, in your dream, there's actually a God who dwells in darkness, in material. And as the alchemist, and it's us, our task, our invitation to take this God and to excavate him from the depth of the darkness and to transform him. And this is actually what will complete the Godhead. And this God, alchemists, they talked about Mercurius as this God trapped in matter, and it's a task of freeing Mercurius. I feel there's something, if I should connect this with my own work in nature coaching, is actually to go out into nature, being in there, like being in nature, literally connecting with the earth, connecting with the trees, connecting with the spirit that lives in nature and that we can connect with in nature, and consciously engaging in a relationship with that God, so to speak. Now, perhaps you can hear this is not sort of conventional coaching, but how I would describe it is also that we're in our coaching, we're sort of exploring a question, where to go in life, how to deal with this relationship, or how to it can be anything. And then there's a moment then in nature coaching where I invite very much my client to sort of to open up and listen to what is being spoken, what nature is speaking, Because one thing is that we can have a conversation, we can explore this together, me and you. But another thing is to invite in that third dialogue partner and say, okay, if we really listen to the trees, if we really connect with the sea, if we really feel into the earth, what is that, how is that speaking, how is that addressing you? What is that calling for, So this would be my sort of approach, my invitation in what I call nature coaching, is to actually try to connect with matter as something ensouled and intelligent, that has a wisdom. Yeah. So I think that feels rounded off.
Yeah, that just sounds unbelievably cool and deep, and I'm very, I'm feeling happy for the people that get to work with you, because I imagine you do this in Denmark mostly.
Yeah.
And so I'll put your website, of course, it's in the description here. You're giving a course. Is that in Danish or also in English, or?
That will also be in English. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not sort of published yet, but it will be soon. So if you're interested in learning about active imagination, meditation, and getting a bit of introduction to Jungian psychology in general, that would be an opportunity there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, from what I know of you is that you're a super deep practitioner, and so I really highly encourage and recommend people to work with you. I also want to thank you for your time. I also want to apologize. I was sometimes so eager and so enthusiastic that I kind of interrupted you a little bit.
No, it's
Take
great.
it as a sign of my, enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nikolaj. Any last words? I give you the mic.
Yeah, just again, thank you, Hans. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I invite everyone who wants to explore this, that they can look at my website and reach out if it resonates. And perhaps an encouragement to really honor your dream life. And if you take something from this conversation, is to really acknowledge the psyche and the imaginal and the dreams as something valuable and something worth paying attention to and caring for. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.